lost $245,000 in assets in a single afternoon because my Aunt Wesley looked me in the eye and swore my mother's estate went completely bankrupt. Using an alt for obvious reasons. Specifics adjusted, the receipts are not. Quick context. I'm Sloan, age 32, female. I work as an operations manager out of Columbus, Ohio, and I am the only child of a single mother who passed away when I was just 14. Before we dive into how I discovered the paper trail that dismantled my aunt's entire life, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story of absolute financial justice. My mother, Lorraine, was a force of nature. She ran a boutique event planning business that was incredibly successful in our local area. She was organized, meticulous, and saved every single penny she could for my future. When she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, her primary focus was ensuring that I would be taken care of. On her deathbed, she called her younger sister, my Aunt Wesley, into the hospital room. Wesley was a certified public accountant who ran her own modest accounting firm. My mother trusted her implicitly with her financial legacy. She signed over the executorship of her estate and established a trust fund for me, which was supposed to be released when I turned 25. The trouble began the exact moment the funeral flowers withered. My Aunt Wesley took me into her home, but she made it immediately clear that I was a financial burden. She lived in an affluent neighborhood, drove a sleek Mercedes-Benz, and wore designer labels like Michael Kors and Coach. Yet, whenever I needed basic school supplies, field trip money, or new clothes, she would sigh deeply. She would pull out a red leather notebook and record the expense. She told me that my mother left behind nothing but debt and a failing business that had to be liquidated just to cover the funeral costs. I grew up feeling like a charity case in my own family. Wesley had a daughter, my cousin Cade, who was a year younger than me. Cade was the undisputed golden child of the household. While I wore hand-me-downs and worked a part-time job at a local grocery store at age 16, Cade received a brand new car for her 16th birthday. Cade went on expensive spring break trips to Florida. Whenever I questioned the disparity, Wesley would give me a cold, patronizing look. She would say that Cade's father left behind real money, whereas my mother left behind mess and liabilities. I was conditioned to believe that my mother had failed me financially, and I carried that shame for over a decade. My aunt's favorite phrases were about financial responsibility and how she was saving me from poverty. She would host family dinners where she openly discussed how difficult it was to raise another person's child on a limited budget. My uncle and cousins would nod in sympathy, looking at me like I was a drain on the family resources. I remember one specific Thanksgiving where Wesley announced to the entire table that she had to dip into her own personal savings just to pay for my dental braces. I sat there, burning with humiliation, apologizing to the entire family while eating dry turkey. Because of this constant financial insecurity, I developed an intense drive to become completely independent. I studied late into the night, secured a full academic scholarship to Ohio State University, and worked 2 jobs while maintaining my grades. I never asked Wesley for a single dollar during college. I lived off ramen, walked everywhere, and managed to graduate completely debt-free. By the time I was 25, I landed a solid corporate job in operations management. I started making a very comfortable salary, but I kept my financial success entirely to myself. I rented a modest apartment, drove an older sedan, and let my family believe I was just scraping by. Meanwhile, Wesley's lifestyle became even more lavish. Her accounting firm expanded, and she moved into a massive custom-built home. She started collecting luxury watches, proudly showing off a Cartier tank watch at a family barbecue. Cade was funded through an expensive private college and had her rent fully covered by her mother. I watched all of this with a dry sense of humor, realizing that greed has a very specific look. I stayed polite, attended the mandatory family gatherings, and kept my mouth shut. The turning point happened when I turned 25, the exact age my mother's trust was supposed to mature. I called Wesley and asked if there were any remaining documents or small keepsakes from my mother's estate that I should sign for. Wesley invited me over to her immaculate office at the accounting firm. She handed me a crisp, manila envelope. Inside was a check for exactly $1,200. She smiled warmly, a performance that belonged on a theater stage, and told me that after balancing all the books, paying off my mother's final business lines of credit, and deducting the cost of my housing and food for 4 years, this was all that was left. She asked me to sign a release form acknowledging that the estate administration was fully closed. I looked at the check for $1,200. I looked at her manicured nails. Something deep inside my gut screamed that this was a lie. My mother was too organized, too successful to leave behind a net worth that barely covered a month of rent. But I did not argue. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply smiled, signed the release form, took the check, and went home. I knew that if I wanted the truth, I had to find it myself without alerting her. 2 years later, fate handed me the perfect key. My operations management firm was hired to audit a mid-sized logistics company that happened to use Wesley's accounting firm for their corporate tax filings. Because of my role, I was granted direct access to a shared secure digital portal that contained historic financial filings, bank statements, and legacy client ledgers from Wesley's firm going back 15 years. The logistics company had uploaded an entire archived database by mistake, including internal correspondence from their external accounting team. Late one Thursday evening, while reviewing the server files from my home office, I found a nested folder labeled Archive Personal Client Trusts. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked through the directories until I found my mother's name, Lorraine Miller Estate Trust. The digital files contained the true, unredacted history of my mother's finances. My mother had not died broke. Her event planning business had been sold to a regional competitor for a clean $185,000. Additionally, she had a life insurance policy worth $60,000 that paid out directly to the estate. The total starting balance of my childhood trust fund was exactly $245,000. As I scrolled through the bank statements, the narrative my aunt had spun for a decade collapsed into pure fraud. Within 6 months of my mother's passing, Wesley had opened a secondary bank account under the trust's name at a completely different financial institution. She had granted herself sole signing authority as the trustee. Then, the liquidations began. There were no payments to business creditors. Instead, there were direct wire transfers from my trust fund to Wesley's personal brokerage account. In October of that first year, she transferred $45,000 to cover the down payment on her Mercedes-Benz. The next summer, she withdrew $22,000 for a luxury family vacation to Europe, a trip she told me was funded by a bonus from her firm. Over the course of 4 years, while I was being shamed for costing her money for school lunch, she systematically drained exactly $243,800 from my account. The most damning piece of evidence was the final closure document. To legally shut down the trust and move the remaining funds, she needed my signature when I turned 18. I found the scanned copy of the authorization form. The signature at the bottom reads Sloan Miller. It was dated on my 18th birthday, but the handwriting was a clumsy, shaky imitation of my script. I was at a mandatory high school track meet in another city on that exact date. She had forged my signature to move the final bulk of the cash into her own accounts. I sat in the dark of my apartment, staring at the glowing screen. The fury was cold and absolute. She had stolen my mother's hard work, used it to fund her own daughter's luxury lifestyle, and made me feel like an unwanted beggar for my entire youth. I needed a proactive, bulletproof countermove. I knew that simply hiring a standard probate lawyer to send a demand letter would allow her to hide assets, transfer funds to Cade, or tie me up in family court for a decade while playing the victim to the rest of the relatives. I needed to lock her into a corner where she could not escape. I spent 3 months quietly building my trap. I obtained my certified high school records, track meet schedules, and official state ID signatures from that era to prove the forgery beyond a shadow of a doubt. I hired a certified forensic document examiner to write a formal report confirming the signature on the trust closure form was completely fraudulent. Next, I used my operations background to map out her firm's vulnerabilities. Wesley's accounting firm relied heavily on its pristine reputation with local high-net-worth business clients. If her professional integrity was compromised, her business would dissolve. I did not go to the police first. I went to the state accountancy board and filed a formal, expedited complaint for professional misconduct and grand theft of fiduciary funds, attaching the forensic signature report and the unredacted bank transfer logs. I also discovered that Wesley was currently applying for a major $300,000 business expansion loan through a local regional bank to buy out a retiring competitor. She had put up her massive custom home as collateral for the loan, and the closing date was fast approaching. I chose my moment of public execution with extreme precision. It wasn't a holiday or a funeral. It was the annual Regional Chamber of Commerce Gala Dinner, an event where Wesley was being recognized as a finalist for Local Businesswoman of the Year. The entire local business community, including her top clients, her banking representatives, and her own staff, were seated at round tables in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. My uncle and cousin Cade were there too, wearing expensive attire, ready to celebrate her success. I bought a single ticket to the gala. I dressed in a sharp, professional tailored suit. I carried a sleek leather portfolio under my arm. During the cocktail hour before the main banquet, Wesley was standing in the center of a circle of her most prominent corporate clients and the vice president of the regional bank handling her expansion loan. She was holding a glass of white wine, laughing, basking in the attention. Cade was standing next to her, flashing a brand new designer handbag. I walked straight into the center of the circle. Wesley froze when she saw me. Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered her polished persona. She said, "Sloan, darling, I didn't know you were attending. This is a business event, it might be a bit out of your element." I smiled back, my expression completely serene. I said, "Actually, Wesley, I'm here on official business. I wanted to deliver something to you before you take the stage tonight." I opened the leather portfolio and pulled out a bound stack of documents. On the front cover was the official stamp of the state accountancy board and the formal civil lawsuit summons demanding the immediate return of $243,800 plus statutory interest. I handed the packet directly to her. I spoke clearly, ensuring my voice carried across the surrounding tables. I said, "These are the forensic audit papers for my mother's estate trust. It turns out you didn't spend my inheritance on my braces. You spent $45,000 of it on the down payment for your Mercedes and another $22,000 on your trip to Europe. I also included the forensic handwriting analysis, proving you forged my signature on the trust closure documents on my 18th birthday." The circle of business clients went completely silent. The bank vice president stepped back, his eyes darting from me to the document in Wesley's hands. Wesley's face went completely pale, turning an ashen gray underneath her heavy makeup. She stammered, "Sloan, this is completely inappropriate. This is a private family matter. You are making a ridiculous mistake." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "The only mistake was thinking I wouldn't check the ledger. The state accountancy board has already accepted the filing, and a formal freeze has been requested on your business accounts as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. Have a wonderful evening." I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom, leaving her standing in the center of a ruined reputation. The fallout was swift, legal, and devastatingly clean. The bank vice president immediately pulled the approval for her $300,000 business expansion loan due to the active fraud investigation. Without the expansion capital, and with her top corporate clients rapidly migrating their accounts to rival firms to avoid being associated with a crooked accountant, Wesley's business revenue plummeted by 70% within 60 days. Faced with a federal criminal referral for bank fraud and forgery, Wesley's attorney begged for a settlement. I refused to negotiate down a single cent. We signed a binding legal settlement where she was forced to liquidate her personal brokerage portfolio and take out a heavy second mortgage on her luxury home to pay me exactly $243,800 for the stolen principal, plus an additional $62,000 in accumulated statutory interest and legal fees. The total payout to my bank account was $305,800. The state accountancy board permanently revoked her professional public accountant license, effectively ending her career forever. Her custom home went up for sale 3 months later because she could no longer afford the secondary mortgage payments. Cade had to drop out of her expensive private college and transfer to a local community college while working a retail job to pay her own rent. My uncle tried to call me, weeping on the phone, accusing me of destroying his family over money from the past. I told him that Wesley destroyed her own family the moment she decided to steal from an orphaned 14-year-old girl. Then I blocked his number. I used the $305,800 to buy a beautiful, historic home in a quiet neighborhood, completely paid off in cash. On the day I moved in, I sat on the front porch with a glass of wine, looking at the keys in my hand. My mother's legacy wasn't lost, it was just delayed, and justice had been served to the last decimal point. If you think my aunt got exactly what she legally deserved, make sure to check out the next video about how my cousin tried to steal a family marina business using a fake handwritten codicil.